What did the Haitian government do with billions of dollars in aid? That question has caused thousands to march in the capital. But will the protesters get an answer? I'm Imran Garta, and today's Newsmaker is Haiti's corruption crisis. Foreign aid is declining, taxes are rising, and billions have gone missing. For years, Haitians, still trying to rebuild after a devastating earthquake in 2010, wanted to know why the government hadn't released money donated by Venezuela. A Senate investigation led to accusations last year that dozens of former government officials and business executives stole the cash. Well, that created a powder keg, and the spark came in the form of a recent tax hike on cigarettes, alcohol, and passports. Haitians took to the streets in what was a week of deadly confrontations with police. It quickly became a referendum on President Jovenel Moïse and his handling of Haiti's economy. Now, as the tear gas clears, the question remains, where did all that money go? We begin our discussion with Randolph Nogle's report.
The Haitian tired of the system. They want the system to change and reverse, and the benefit of the community. This is the very reason why today they choose to invade the street in order for the government to understand the people tired of them.
It's been a long time coming. The boiling over of anger at politicians accused of stealing badly needed aid money with impunity. And Haitian President Jovenel Moïse is in the crosshairs.
We are saying that no accord signed with Jovenel Moïse is worth anything. The people demand that Jovenel Moïse leave, but not into exile, because his place is in the national penitentiary. He is corrupt. He has to be with the other corrupt ones. We demand that.
Moïse rose to power after a nearly two-year electoral process, encumbered by delays and allegations of voter fraud. Many are angry that no one has been held accountable for the suspected misuse of public funds. Two Senate Commission reports accuse more than a dozen former government officials and heads of private firms of embezzling $2 billion in Venezuelan loans. The subsidized energy program, known as Petrocaribe, freed up money for social and economic programs, as well as infrastructure projects. The funds would have helped Haiti rebuild after a devastating earthquake in 2010. But audits show much of the money was mismanaged. Some was spent on construction projects that were never completed. A company owned by Moïse is cited in the Senate Commission reports. Moïse initially didn't comment last week as a nationwide strike set in. He then broke his silence, striking a defiant tone, saying that he would not resign, adding, "Democracy requires sacrifice. Democracy requires the respect of rules. Just like the Constitution orders, we have to keep democracy and prevent anarchy." Despite Moïse's calls for order, many Haitians are determined to keep protesting until he's gone. Corruption is widely seen as the source of Haiti's considerable economic problems. Its currency has plummeted, inflation has soared, and more than 60% of the country live below the poverty line, on less than $2.50 a day. Unrest in Haiti has been an enduring fixture of its political landscape. And for these protesters, that won't change until those seen as picking the public pocket are held to account. And the rebuilding of both the political system and the country can begin in earnest. Randolph Nogle, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from New York by Sienna Marope Singh. She's a human rights lawyer at the Institute for Justice and Democracy in Haiti. And also in New York is Kim Ives. He's the founder of the weekly newspaper Haiti Liberté and was a founding member of the International Support Haiti Network. I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Sienna, let me start with you. Is it a very dangerous time in Haiti right now as we've seen the protests and their aftermath?
It's a very uncertain time. I mean, what's happening in Haiti right now is the result of huge frustration with an ongoing political scandal. It was sparked by revelations last year that the Haitian government has misappropriated $1.8 billion in a Venezuelan-backed Petrocaribe fund. The way that fund operated was that it allowed Haiti to have low-interest fuel, low-cost fuel, and that the revenue that the Haitian government was to make from that was to be invested in national development. Instead of investing it in development, 1.8 billion has been stolen. So understandably, there is huge frustration at that. And I think that this moment has also tapped into broader political frustration. What we're seeing is the Haitian people en masse saying that they have had enough with this system of government corruption, government impunity, by which there is never accountability for the powerful when they abuse the rights of the poor majority. So far, peace protests have been very peaceful. There has been a crackdown by the police and the government attempting to really crack down on civil society, and that is very concerning. And I think it's really anyone's guess where this goes to next.
Right. And so, Kim Ives, in everything President Moise has done in response to the protests and the questions and the investigations looking into corruption and looking into whether that money was stolen, with everything they've done, has it become clear to the protesters and others that, yes, this money has been siphoned off and has been stolen?
Yes, I think it's been clear from the beginning. The people have become quite well acquainted with the corruption of the PHTK, the Haitian Bald-Headed Party of President Moise and his predecessor, Michel Martelly. Corruption was really their hallmark. In fact, Jovenel Moise came into power under indictment for money laundering. The State Corruption Unit, UCREF, issued a report showing about $7 million was clearly being laundered by his agribusiness firm, Agritrans. He decapitated that agency the minute he got into power. It took him 2 tries to do so. And he's since gone forward. And now the genie is out of the bottle since July, when the government tried to hike gas prices by 50% in the case of kerosene, at least. And I don't think that they're going to be able to get a hold of this, get it back in the bottle, because the people are just incensed.
Yeah, and so, Sienna, the protests erupt. He keeps quiet for a while, and then he comes out, and he's hardly very conciliatory. He says things like, democracy requires sacrifice, democracy requires the respect of rules, just like the Constitution orders. That can't be going down well with the people.
Yeah, I think what's been very concerning to see is that, again, this is a crisis that has been sparked by impunity, by failures of accountability, by lack of responsiveness to the needs of the Haitian people, and that in response to the very legitimate frustrations of the people and the peaceful protests that have been occurring in Port-au-Prince, rather than attempting to be genuinely responsive, Jovenel Moise is retreating into defensiveness and doing everything he can to reinforce his impunity, his lack of accountability. So we saw that in his statement. I think very concerningly, we've also seen attempts by the presidential palace to politicize the national police force. Last week, there were reports of a new police unit circulating in Port-au-Prince that was wearing a different uniform, carrying automatic weapons, and reporting directly to the presidential palace. That was disavowed by the Haitian National Police as not within their command, and there was a lot of backlash against that. But what we see is the president trying to create clearly his own power force and clearly indicating that he's going to try and stay in power no matter what, and doing that in a way that isn't based on real dialogue, real responsiveness, but just a further retreat into impunity.
Yeah, and Kim, so his colleague, the Prime Minister, comes along and says, I have a tangible solution as well. I've got this little program to create jobs. Is that going to make any difference whatsoever? Is that going to placate people at all?
I don't think so. Jean-Henri Séan, his new prime minister, is seen by the population as an opportunist, as somebody who is ready to work with that sector, the PHTK sector. I think, he's making a lot of gestures towards not just placating the people, but backing up the Petrocaribe investigation and bringing things to a trial. But I don't think it's going to be enough to essentially stop the protests.
And Sienna, the opposition spearheaded this investigation in the Senate into the corruption, and they've sensed opportunity. They've been very vocal as far as I understand, at these protests. But has their track record been any better than the ruling party when it comes to corruption?
Well, this first investigation by the Haitian Senate that, sparked this over a year ago was spearheaded by former Senate President Yuri Latortu, who the US government in leaked WikiLeaks cables has described as the poster boy of corruption. So I don't think that anyone really thinks that these motives are anything more than politically motivated, an attempt for a power grab. But I think that what's happened since is what we've seen is the emergence of a genuinely popular movement that is bringing together a range of people from across the Haitian political spectrum and across all walks of social life, from young people in the middle class to people in really poor neighbourhoods of Haiti, and that there is not a clear leader of this movement. There are certainly people who are attempting to claim leadership, and there are many very vocal people, and of course there is leadership behind the scenes, no doubt, but this is a movement genuinely of the people that is calling not only for accountability for this Petrocaribe scandal, but for a change in how Haitian politics is done, and for real accountability to the people, and a new kind of political order in Haiti. And I think that's what's very inspiring to see about this movement that's happening on the streets right now.
Kim, do you echo that?
I do. I think it's very similar to what we saw 32 years ago in 1986 with the uprisings against Jean-Claude Duvalier, who was the dictator of a 30-year-old dictatorship of himself and his father. And like today, the impetus of the movement really began in November. He may survive through Christmas. Usually there's a lull in December, but January and February are likely to be very turbulent. And I don't think that, this is something, the momentum is too great. And as Sienna mentioned, the opposition is too broad. You have everybody from sort of the enlightened bourgeoisie to the radical left, which are engaged in this front against the government. So I don't see them surviving.
Sienna, if Jovenel Moïse called you up and said, come to Port-au-Prince, sit down with me and explain to me how I can turn this around. I take your advice. Help me. How do I do this? How do I turn this around? What would you tell him?
Well, I mean, I think I'd probably first tell him that he should be speaking to his own people rather than foreigners sitting in the United States. But beyond that, I think that there are very clear demands that have come out of the opposition, and that includes for a fully transparent audit as opposed to the half audits that have been done and that have been acted on in the past, and for the arrest of the people who have been clearly implicated in this corruption and restitution of the funds that were stolen. And as Kim mentioned, there have been symbolic gestures at investigations so far, but there really haven't been any real substantive effects at accountability. I mean, I think the reality here is this government cannot really respond because it is deeply implicated. Both personally, Jovenel Moïse has been implicated, but also it won election on the basis of political patronage, not because it had broad-based support of the population. Jovenel Moïse won with 10% of the national population's vote due to voter suppression and extremely low turnout. And the way it remains in power is political patronage from the rich and powerful in Haiti, and that enables and in many ways necessitates corruption. So I'm not sure how this government is going to be able to respond without really cleaning house and accepting the consequences of the deeply entrenched corruption. But the way it should try and do that is to talk to the people who are opposing it and who are making very clear and very legitimate demands of their government.
Right. Now, Kim, in order to clean up corruption, does Haiti need a change of government, or does it need a change of the entire political culture at play right now?
Yeah, I think it's a systemic change Haiti needs. I mean, one of the big factors we have to look at is Haiti is still under United Nations military occupation. There's a UN force in there named MINIJUST, the UN mission for justice, supposedly. And this is a Chapter 7 mission under the United Nations, which they may seek to send in more troops at some point. There's about 1,300 policemen there now, but soldiers were there until 2 years ago. And so I think the situation is very fluid. The people, it's an unstoppable force. How immovable the object they go up against is still the question.
And Sienna, when it comes to helping Haiti in the sense that, I mean, it's not a country that needs handouts per se, but after the earthquake, there was a huge outpouring of goodwill from all over the world. And I know that Venezuela has its own problems. So when we look at the Petro-Caribe issue, perhaps it's a bit of an outlier. But given the corruption and given the fact that a lot of aid money has been squandered and stolen, is this going to make other nations think twice about getting involved with Haiti or even helping when it needs help?
Well, what's really unfortunate, and what we saw in the reconstruction response, is that the way that international aid has occurred in Haiti is often that it not only bypasses the government, and of course, as you mentioned, there are reasons that are very genuine related to corruption around that, although it does create a vicious cycle, but it bypasses local organizations. If we see what happened post-2010 earthquake, is that the vast amount of that money was either not delivered after it was pledged, or it was delivered through USAID contractors and large international NGOs, and a huge amount of money was absorbed by a kind of professional class of the aid industry, rather than going through long-lasting small grassroots groups that actually understand the context and have knowledge about how to do this reconstruction. And so I think, unfortunately, the fact that there has not been more reconstruction after the earthquake has led to what, will be called in New York kind of donor circles Haiti fatigue. But that's extremely unfair, because the way that aid was done was setting itself up for failure. And I think what we see as well is a total lack of accountability from the international community, broadly speaking, whether that's the United Nations or the aid community, about actually how they do their work and how they hold themselves accountable when they have very real damages on the people they're claiming to serve.
Okay, well, it's been really good dipping into this topic. We haven't covered Haiti in a while. I look forward to talking Haiti again with the two of you in the not-too-distant future. Sienna Marope Singh and Kim Ives, I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Coming up on the Newsmakers, Donald Trump pulls aid out of Palestine. We debate whether the move will lead to more poverty and violence. And bad blood over the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Why some didn't give Saudi's Crown Prince a warm welcome during his tour of the Arab world. The UN is observing an International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, an event established more than 40 years ago. The Trump administration seems to be marking it this year by firing more than half the staff at one of America's biggest aid organizations in Palestine. USAID builds roads, schools, and medical clinics in the Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank. The White House says the decision will force Palestinians to the negotiating table to talk peace with Israel. But could Donald Trump's hardline approach also lead to more poverty and unrest in the region? Natalie Perhernan reports.
Life without international aid in the Palestinian territories is next to impossible to imagine. It funds schools, medical care, employment projects, and even food. But this year, that aid has been under constant threat. The US was once the main donor of humanitarian assistance in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. But it has stopped funding for Palestinians. Reports suggest it could be about to withdraw its last government presence, which handles aid for the territories. USAID and other American agencies have allocated about $4.7 billion in funding to Gaza and the West Bank since 2001. Those funds have gone towards projects like access to clean water for 1 million Palestinians. But funding for USAID's operations in those areas dried up in August, after a review was ordered by President Donald Trump. Money that was allocated to those areas has been redirected to projects elsewhere. The Israeli news outlet Haaretz says the USAID office will let go of half of its staff in the West Bank and Gaza in the coming weeks and shut down entirely next year. In a statement, a USAID official says no decisions have been made about future staffing at Embassy Jerusalem's USAID mission. This comes on the back of the US pulling out as the major donor of UNRWA this year. The UN agency is the main provider of humanitarian assistance to Palestinians. Other nations have stepped in to plug most of the funding shortfall, but only for 2018. President Trump has made it clear US funds for Gaza and the West Bank are subject to the Palestinian leadership taking part in peace negotiations.
As you know, we were paying them $550 million a year. Now we're paying them nothing a year because for years and years, we were being abused by the leadership of the Palestinians and giving them all of this money. So now we're not. But that will start up again, and it'll start up. I look forward to it because they use it for some purposes that are good and some purposes that are not good and not acceptable. So yeah, they're absolutely coming back to the table, and they want to come back to the table.
The Trump administration is expected to announce details of its long-awaited Israel-Palestine peace plan early in the new year. But should withholding humanitarian assistance to Palestinians even be used as a bargaining chip? Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
To discuss this, we're joined from Tel Aviv by Dave Harden, who led USAID efforts in the occupied West Bank and Gaza for more than a decade. He's also the managing director of the Georgetown Strategy Group. In Toronto, we have Jennifer Atalla, who's a former senior manager with USAID in Palestine. And in Washington, D.C., we have Middle East analyst Matthew Brodsky. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. Matthew, let me begin with you. So it seems to be happening. More than 60% of the staff of USAID will be laid off, according to these reports, first reported in Haaretz and then elsewhere. And eventually, USAID will stop its work with the Palestinians in the occupied territories. Is that justified?
Well, I think this is part of the Trump administration's larger plan, which has to do with seeing a return on the investment of American money when it spends it overseas. You can see the way he's conceived of Syria, where he's pulled out some $200 million in U.S. stabilization assistance, but he wants to see the rest of the Middle Eastern states put in that kind of money, so he got contributions there. So what he's trying to do here is that he realizes that there hasn't been a return on the U.S. investment. The USAID that began in 1994 happened when there was an Oslo peace process occurring. That peace process is gone. The Palestinian politics is divided between Hamas, which wants to destroy Israel, so there's no peace process with Gaza. And in the West Bank, you have, it's run by Palestinian Authority that is essentially still paying the families of terrorists as a #1 priority that it keeps saying, again, in Arabic media that that's a priority. So the U.S. doesn't see a reason that it's going to keep pumping money into something that just simply isn't working. And especially if they're not going to come to the table and negotiate, the U.S. doesn't need to be rewarding that type of behavior.
Okay, and I'm glad that we have two people who have worked within the system on the ground to tackle some of these issues that have been brought up. Dave Harden, what Matthew said essentially sums up what the Trump administration has said over the past year or so, with the moving of the embassy, with saying that the Palestinians don't give us any bang for our buck. From where you stand, how does that look?
Well, I think what's happening right now is that we're seeing a diminishment of American power and American influence. U.S. aid assistance to the Palestinians and to the Israelis has made a dramatic improvement in the conditions. For instance, there hasn't been an Arab Spring in the West Bank. U.S. aid assistance has essentially solved the water crisis between the Israelis and the Palestinians outside of Gaza, but in terms of negotiations, that's no longer an issue. And U.S. assistance has increased private sector trade, particularly in technology in Ramallah, and reduced insecurity and violence coming out of Jenin. So I don't think Matthew's thesis holds up at all.
It's interesting, Dave, because even someone like Joseph Diner, the journalist who's kind of on the left, anti-occupation, wrote an interesting piece recently. He said in the long run, Trump is doing the Palestinians an unintended favor by depriving agencies like USAID of their funding in Palestine. The U.S. administration is removing the occupation's veneer of benevolence and one of the PA's sources of legitimacy. So it's not just coming from the right, it's also coming from the left. What do you make of that, Dave?
So there are elements of this that are true. And of course, in some respects, international assistance, including U.S. assistance to the Palestinians, blunts the consequences of poor policy decisions by all the parties. But that's only part of the story. The other part of the story is we have tangible evidence of reduced violence in Jenin once we opened up trading corridors. We literally have hundreds and hundreds of tech entrepreneurs in Ramallah who are engaged with the world. I now am the CEO of a tech firm that has dozens of people in Ramallah, and they have stock options. That changes everything. And this all began because of U.S. assistance and engagement between the parties.
Jennifer Atalla, is this policy going to cause harm?
It's absolutely going to cause harm, and there are a number of reasons why. First of all, I question the intention of this policy. If the intention really is to bring Abbas to the table, it's not going to work, because the Palestinian Authority has already seen where Trump's intentions are, whether it's with following through on the 1995 policy to recognize Jerusalem and move the embassy, whether it's removing the Palestinian mission to Washington, D.C. and cutting off all ties and communications with Palestinians in Washington. It's already been clear what the Trump administration is interested in pursuing here, and also in terms of allowing Israel to continue its policies that are also detrimental to the region. If you think about, this is a classic case of positional bargaining at its worst, and to be honest, bullying. And that's never what works. At the end of the day, what that does is it breaks trust amongst the communities on the ground, and we have to live with each other, right? And so this is going to cause absolute harm on a political level. On a national security level, if you look at the work that we were doing with the Usaid programs and others in the West Bank and Gaza, it was actually the Israeli government that wanted us to do a lot of our work in Gaza. They were the ones that helped let us go back in and actually respond to some of the humanitarian emergencies there. It's in Israel's interest. It's in the U.S. government's interest. If you just even think about the humanitarian crisis on the ground and a moral responsibility that we have as human beings, as a nation, to keep this from getting worse. If you look at what's happening now, even just with the water in Gaza, right? And there are USAID programs that are addressing this and keeping people from dying and actually preventing them from taking other means like terrorism.
Okay, so let's go to Matthew. So Matthew, the other two are essentially saying that the U.S. is using aid as a weapon here. And it's also saying it's really unfair for those millions of Palestinians that, hey, listen, why is the message that we have to capitulate to U.S. descriptions and demands of what peace will be when we don't even have the power to create peace? We're just ordinary Palestinians trying to live. And if we don't, you're not going to give us our roads and our schools and the infrastructure projects and other projects that you've been giving us for so long. Isn't that fundamentally unfair on those Palestinian people?
Yeah, I think this is really fairly simple. The U.S. has been doing something for decades, and it has not worked. So a fool is going to keep doing the exact same thing over and over again. Now, Mahmoud Abbas has listened to, apparently, John Kerry, our previous Secretary of State, and has decided he's just going to wait out the Trump administration and not engage in negotiations. There should be a penalty attached to that, and the United States is making sure that that happens. Plus, it's good policy because, again, we know what hasn't worked. Now, everything that we just heard from your previous two guests, none of them have actually tackled the idea that there are a lot of wealthy countries around the region. Some of them are even spending a lot of money supporting Hamas and hosting the external leadership, who are, again, dedicated to the destruction of the state of Israel.
So let's
These countries have money.
So let's
the United States isn't saying that no country can give money to them. They're just saying it's not wise for the U.S. to do so.
Okay, so let's go to Jennifer with this. So Jennifer, we have the UNRWA case where the U.S. cut funding to UNRWA. The Europeans filled that gap very quickly, right? And isn't it fair for someone like Matthew to say, hey, Qatar, hey, every other country that wants to support the Palestinians or different Palestinian factions, step up. If you want to get involved, why don't you guys fill this vacuum if USAID is out of the picture?
So I've heard this argument a number of times before, and it's actually deflecting the question of what the U.S. government policy should be as U.S. government policy, which is where I wanted to keep the discussion. But if we're going to talk about other governments, yeah, for sure. I mean, there are classic arguments about the Arab world needing to play a more important and greater role in supporting the humanitarian needs of the Palestinian people. Also, the Israeli government. The Israeli government is militarily occupying the West Bank. What Palestinians are the longest standing group of refugees in the world, and it's because of policies created by European governments and the U.S. and the creation of the State of Israel. And so a lot of people have responsibility here. But I think the question really is, what is the outcome and what is the intention of such a strict U.S. government policy towards this end? I don't see us doing this in other cases, and I also don't see us pulling out funding from Israel. Israel is getting $3.3 billion of aid from the United States government, which is really nothing in comparison. I mean, it's just so much. What Palestinians were getting is nothing in comparison to that. And so why aren't we also putting pressure on Israel?
That.
Okay, so
that's
Matthew,
why we
tell
do
me
things for them.
Okay, at 3.3 billion, you had a bit of a chuckle. Tell me why.
Because the reason we have a partnership with Israel and provide things for them and they provide things for us is because they're an ally. See, that's kind of important here, and I don't think should be lost in the conversation. The Palestinian Authority and Hamas, they're not allies. In fact, what they're doing is obstructing, and it's really a really simple thing.
Although,
the Middle East can, of course, make up the money if it wanted
although
to.
Matthew, the U.S. has claimed to be an honest broker. It has claimed to be an honest broker, so here you're saying, well, screw the other side. We support one side.
It's not a matter of being an honest broker. It's a matter of being the only side that can really negotiate in the middle and get Israel itself to the table, because it's not going to be Russia or any of the other groups that, frankly, don't want Israel to exist to begin with anyways. Because the United States has this type of relationship with Israel is why it is able to then work in a negotiation.
Okay, so Jennifer respond and then Dave.
Incidentally, the side that lost, which is the Palestinian Authority, that's the side that needs to be brought to the table.
Okay, Jennifer, come in, and then Dave. Jennifer?
Sure. So, I question, first of all, the idea that the Palestinian Authority is not involved in our work as the U.S. government. The Palestinian Authority is absolutely involved. The Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government work together towards national security, which is also very contentious amongst Palestinians and amongst internationals. But they do work together, and so that's something I think to pay attention to. But this question, let's think about U.S. national security, right? We're talking about Israel being an ally for sure. I'm not saying take away all of the funding. I'm saying if we're going to put pressure on Palestinians, then also put pressure on Israelis. The Palestinians have no reason to come to the table when they've seen the Trump administration pull out all the stops and lay out all their cards. I mean, there's a reason why Democrat and Republican administrations in the past have not moved the embassy to Jerusalem, both, right? And it's because it takes away a very important bargaining chip. And so I think we have to think about U.S. national security here as well, right? There's a reason why U.S. aid programs, especially from the Office of Transition Initiatives and others, exist, right? And it's essentially to help create jobs and help create stable environments on the ground, meeting basic humanitarian needs in order to prevent people being sort of swept away by those other groups that are promising them things that they actually never deliver on, like Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood and others.
Okay. Dave, come in.
Let me just say, I understand what she's saying, and it makes sense.
So I want to agree with Matthew.
Let's give Dave a chance.
To see that it hasn't worked.
Matthew, let's give Dave a chance.
Sorry, Matthew. Let me get a chance in here, please. Okay. So first, I want to agree with Matthew that Israel is an ally, and it's a very close ally. So that's a very important relationship in the Middle East, and the Middle East is changing very dramatically. We want to retain that relationship. The U.S. aid assistance is not leveraged to Mahmoud Abbas. It's irrelevant to Mahmoud Abbas. It doesn't affect his political calculations at all. But when we pull out U.S. aid, what we do is diminish our ability to influence and affect the decisions both on the ground and in the political sphere. And so UNRWA is a great example. When we pulled out of UNRWA, the Europeans and the Gulf states filled that vacuum. And they filled it in a manner that will make UNRWA reform even less probable. So I would say that what we are in fact doing is not creating leverage, but creating a vacuum for others to fill. And that can't be in American interest.
And Matthew, the Americans then lose their influence on the Middle East. Is that what you want?
No, again, this is really just about not wasting our money. If you even look at where the money that has gone before, we're talking about for clinics, we're talking about for schools, right, from USAID. U.S. aid for schools, look at the textbooks that the Palestinians themselves use. They're filled with mythology that show that Israel doesn't exist. When you have a national fiction that's being created, which again, we saw with the movement of the embassy. The Palestinian claim for the movement of the embassy demonstrated that they even have a problem with Israelis having West Jerusalem. Not even talking about East Jerusalem, about moving the embassy to West Jerusalem. These fictions prevent Israel from having a partner. The Palestinians aren't going to come to the table until they realize that they don't have options but to negotiate. And by just simply keeping them on welfare from the U.S. in return for nothing has achieved nothing. All of the arguments that we're hearing right now, I understand they make sense. They seem reasonable, with the exception that they've been tried and failed. So it's time for something different.
Okay, so Jennifer, the Palestinians are basically cashing in their welfare checks every month, and they live in
Gaza today.
Okay, Dave. Okay, come in, Dave. Come in, Dave.
Yeah. So I was in Gaza this morning, and I came out, and I actually spoke to the IDF, and I asked them about what they thought of the USAID cuts. And again, first and foremost, we do need to help vulnerable people to the extent that we can. But the IDF called the pullout of USAID assistance catastrophic to their security interests. Nobody wants food baskets for the next 3 generations. That's a misuse of our funds. That's a misuse of our goals. That is a catastrophe as well. What they want are jobs and a political future and a horizon. And we are actually seeing that. Sorry? No,
I'm saying that's the goal of UNRWA as a relief works agency dedicated to only the Palestinian refugees.
What, to
is to
create
keep the refugee problem growing by inflating numbers. It's designed to keep the conflict continuing.
And what we've now done with UNRWA, now what we've done is that we can't reform it because we're not involved in it any longer. Listen,
Scrap it. There's a UN agency that exists
op-eds.
There's a UN agency that exists for refugees. Palestinians
I've
are
written
privileged.
that the UNRWA needs reform. But wait, are you going to just talk or are you going to listen? Okay? So the fact of the matter is UNRWA does need reform. And the fact of the matter is we're no longer funding it. And so there will be no opportunity for us to allow and to push a reform agenda with UNRWA. It does need to be reformed. I completely agree. But let's not mix kind of food baskets and creating modern economic opportunity. By the way, if you want to ask the Israelis, do you want the Americans in the school system? Do you want us to build? Do you want us to build the schools? Do you want us to teach the teachers at Bard College? Every Israeli would say, yeah, you know what? We actually do want the Americans in the Palestinian education system, but we're vacating that now.
And you know what?
So good luck.
We have
because who's going to fill it? Who's going to fill that space?
Exactly, and we have great trust for the authenticity of and the veracity of what you're saying because you've been on the ground for decades. Jennifer Attallah, just very finally to address, I guess, one of the intangibles when we read Trump's tweets, and I don't have time to go into many of them, going back, a couple years, he has this view that the Palestinians are essentially fleecing the American people. They're cashing in their welfare checks. They don't want peace. They're just siphoning off, this money coming from the Americans. We heard some of that from Matthew now. Address that very finely for us, Jennifer, before I close out this segment.
Sure. I'll tell you an example of some of the tech entrepreneurs in Gaza that I was working with through the USAID programming. They literally are so hungry to have work and be able to provide for their families that they would set up offices in 3 locations in order to get access to electricity, which only they have access to 4 hours a day, just to be in different zones. So one in their home, one at a cafe in a different zone, and one in an office somewhere else. People just want to feed their families, and that's really what it comes down to. When I was leading our engagement, reconnecting the Gaza garment industry with their previous partners in Tel Aviv, I literally had Israelis and Jewish Israelis in Tel Aviv in tears telling me they would much rather be working with their former Gaza partners than having to go to China and having to go to Turkey. No offense to TRT. Literally, I mean, it's not a best case scenario. It's also very challenging to think about building an economy that then is dependent on Israel. That doesn't make sense either for the long term. But these are people who have to live together, who have to build and be able to have trust amongst each other. And this is just going to continue hurting that. And it's not in the best interest of the Israelis. It's not in the best interest of Palestinians. It's not humane, and it's not in the best interest of United States national security, which is what I think the main point should be coming out of the administration right now.
Okay. Unfortunately, I've got to wrap. But listen, it's been really good talking to all of you. Matthew Brodsky, Dave Harden, and Jennifer Attallah. It's been a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers.
We demonstrate today to denounce the visit of the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, to Tunisia. It's wrong that we're hosting him. This is wrong for the Tunisian state and for the Arab Spring.
Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is in Argentina for the G20 summit this weekend, but he first traveled to Tunisia and was met with protesters waving bone saws and chanting anti-Saudi slogans. Tunis was just one stop for the de facto Saudi leader, who was on a tour of the Arab world. He also visited Saudi Arabia's allies in Egypt, Bahrain and the UAE. Many saw it as an attempt to restore his image in the wake of the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi and mounting criticism over alleged Saudi war crimes in Yemen. Let's bring in our panel now. In Tunis, we have Ines Jadidi. She's a political activist who participated in the recent protests. And with me here in the studio is Sami Hamdi, Editor-in-Chief of the online current affairs magazine, The International Interest. I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Ines Jadidi, let me begin with you. Tell me why you took to the streets and decided to protest when Mohammed bin Salman came to town.
Okay, so here in Tunisia, we've been following, what happened from the moment Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman arrived to power, and what happened with the Saudian purge, with what happened with the Prime Minister of Lebanon, the mistreatment, what's happened in Yemen, and finally, ultimately, what happened with Jamal Khashoggi. And we found that what happened was very brutal and with an unprecedented cruelty. When we heard that the Crown Prince is coming to Tunisia, we found that, this was not the right moment, especially that we understood that if he's coming, it was to whitewash his bloody face and reputation. With the credibility given by a democratic country like Tunisia.
Right.
So we don't want to give this credibility. Yes.
Yes, and I'm glad you explained it so fully. Sami Hamdi, those protests in Tunis, what did they tell us about the current divisions in the Arab and Muslim world when it comes to not just Saudi Arabia as a country, but the person, Mohammed bin Salman?
I think we have to remember that most of the leaders in the Middle East are not loved by people generally, neither by their own people, neither by people elsewhere. I think it's very interesting that Tunisia protested against Mohammed bin Salman, emphasizing that there is this mood amongst the Arab world that Mohammed bin Salman should not get away with killing Jamal Khashoggi. Let's remember, Jamal Khashoggi is not the first journalist to disappear. There are other journalists who've disappeared in other countries, other journalists kidnapped, rendition. Amnesty is talking about Sheikh Suleiman al-Dawish, who's been killed under torture in prison. Salman al-Ouda is in prison. Abdulaziz al-Tarif is in prison. Awad al-Ghani is in prison. We can name so many names with them of these people in prison. So I think there's always a disconnect between the people and the leaders. I think what we have to be wary of is that the way Mohammed bin Salman has chosen the countries to visit, he's chosen weak countries or countries who can't say anything to him. He chose Bahrain, which is a Saudi proxy. He chose UAE, who are his allies. He chose Sisi, who relies on his money. And he chose Tunisia, which is so desperate for investment that the government will not actually do anything to Mohammed bin Salman. In fact, he was welcomed. Beji Qaid al-Sibsi was happy to see him because they're in an economic situation, a very bad economic situation. They need that investment. So I think with regards to these protests, we should be wary also that Tunisia is a country where protests are regular now, over unemployment, over high suicide rates, over this recent inheritance reform that's taking place. So in other words, this protest is just one of many that is already taking place in Tunisia. It's not necessarily just because of Mohammed bin Salman.
Okay, so Ines, let me pose this to you. Despite your protests, despite the fact that there are multiple reasons why you didn't want Mohammed bin Salman to visit, Your government needs Saudi investment. The economy is not great. The Saudis need to invest in your country to keep it going. And ultimately, there are many other countries in the region that need Saudi money via an alliance. Is that the reality?
Okay, to be true, since the revolution, Saudi Arabia didn't help Tunisia because they were not, in favor of what happened of the revolution, of the democratic process, and they didn't help. We received help from other countries, but not from this country. But until now, there is no concrete help. Even after the visit and during the meeting, the official meeting held during the visit, I remind that the visit was only for 4 hours. So it was not. There was no agreements, nothing. Serious to be. Promised by Saudis during this visit.
Right.
So I am like other people. The generation of who believe in this revolution and a change in the politics and the economy of the country. We believe that the wealth should come from locally. We should create wealth by empowering our own economy, not only relying on foreign investment. It could be from Saudi or from Europe or from other countries.
Right.
This is not the solution to our local problems.
Sami Hamdi,
this is what I believe.
Okay, certainly. So Sami, as I look at the fault lines in the Middle East right now and the Cold War, if you like, between the Iranians and the Saudis, it's something I face myself on this program. If I ask tough questions of the Saudi guests, they say, oh, you're pro-Iran, you're pro-Houthi, you're pro-Assad. How dare you question Mohammed bin Salman? How dare you question, our version of events? What's going on right now in terms of those fault lines in the region, triggered by the Khashoggi case? Saudi Arabia didn't decide to invade or decide to start fighting the Houthis in Yemen the day after Khashoggi was killed. It didn't decide to execute people for witchcraft and sorcery and so forth after it killed Jamal Khashoggi. This was happening long beforehand. But there was something about that event and everything that happened afterwards that seems to have exacerbated the fault lines in the region. Why?
I think what we have to be aware of first and foremost is that Saudi does many things wrong, 100%. Saudi is a vicious country in the way that it treats its opposition and whatnot. But the reason why I object to the use of Yemen necessarily as an example to use it is simply because Yemen was a situation where all the parties came together, national dialogue, national government, and the Houthis did the military coup. Irrespective, now you have a humanitarian crisis. With your question of Khashoggi and how Khashoggi has influenced that, Yemen in particular, and the fault lines.
Yemen and everything else.
Yemen and everything else.
Right.
You've seen that the US now have publicly come out and undermined the Saudi operations in the region, something that they didn't do beforehand. You'll remember that James Mattis was giving a talk in Bahrain, and he said that in 30 days they have to meet in Stockholm. But at the same time, these are words, not necessarily actions. Even though there is talk of that the US planes have stopped, US has stopped refueling Saudi planes, if you'll notice that today that there was a UN resolution which tried to call for a ceasefire in at least Hudaydah in order to promote peace talks in Stockholm. And the Saudis and the UAE essentially lobbied, saying if this resolution goes past, we will not go to Stockholm for talks. And the US also lobbied, saying that it will ruin the peace process if this UN resolution goes through, implying that in the grander scheme of things here with these fault lines, the Jamal Khashoggi case, even if it has applied pressure on Mohammed bin Salman, and we've seen some ostensible change in tactics, the realities stay exactly the same. Saudis and the US see Iran controlling Iraq, dominant in Syria, dominant in Lebanon, dominant in Yemen. In other words, the US now, and this is the reality, the harsh reality, the tragedy of the Khashoggi case, which is that when you ask the US, if you've seen Mike Pompeo's article in the Wall Street Journal, the op-ed, where he basically says that, guys, Khashoggi is a tragedy and a bad case, but we need Saudi Arabia because we're going to need to fight the Iranians. And the reality is, Imran, let's be brutally honest, from a Saudi perspective, from a geopolitical perspective, they are correct. Yeah, Iran is encroaching on Saudi Arabia.
But it does look like it says, well, I know Michael killed Fredo, but we need to make sure that we need to make sure that the Corleone family goes clean at some point, and we need to help them, right? The point being that in response to the Khashoggi case, they want to move on so quickly. If you want to question the Khashoggi case, you are met with a response of Iran. Fine, we'll deal with what Iran's done in the region. But in response to it, the first pivot is Iran. Doesn't it fundamentally weaken their argument and makes the electorate in these different countries that support the Saudis suspicious of the United States and others, and their alliance with this country.
Imran, if the Iraq war didn't make you suspicious of the Americans, if the war in Afghanistan didn't make you suspicious of the Americans, if Guantanamo didn't, if expanding the drone strike program didn't, if not punishing banks for causing a global economic crisis didn't make you suspect, I have no idea why this Khashoggi case is going to make that much of a difference. Right. The standards in this region are different. This is a region, Imran, where you've seen Sisi open fire on thousands of protesters in broad daylight while they are running into mosques for safety, opened fire, killed hundreds, and he was giving a talk in the Nelson Mandela Forum at the UN General Assembly. Right. This is a region which has seen Bashar al-Assad massacre his people simply because he did not want to give free and fair elections. This is a region that has seen Libya descend into civil war, and the Italians and the French are looking after the oil interests in Libya, both competing to come up with a political solution to be the leader in Libya, while the US only gets involved when Haftar takes over oil ports because it affects the oil price. This is a region where the standards are different. Khashoggi is one journalist of many. This is a region which has seen oppression towards repression of journalists since the 1960s, 1970s.
So this is going to blow over.
And
it's business as usual.
It depends on the Turks and it depends on the CIA. The Turks are not willing to let Mohammed bin Salman go. They believe that Mohammed bin Salman has been integral in terms of that he supported the Ombesh Tammuz, the 15 July coup. They believe Mohammed bin Salman, well, not believe, he actually did. He was in London saying Turkey is part of an axis of evil. No, as in Mohammed bin Salman in London said he is part of an axis, Turkey is part of an axis of evil. They've been lobbying in think tanks to try to push this narrative that Turkey is supporting terrorism. President Erdogan despises Mohammed bin Salman. Turkey despises Mohammed bin Salman. They want his head to roll. The problem is, however, Trump is telling the Turks, he's sending Gina Haspel, he's talking with Erdogan. There are rumors he's lobbying Erdogan while they are in Argentina to say, listen, we will just go easy on him. Just let's come to some sort of agreement. Khalid al-Faisal was rumored, reported that he came to Ankara and said, we will lift the blockade on Qatar. We will give you back your investments. We will do whatever you want us to do. Please just drop the case. And Erdogan said no. The reality of the situation is this. How far can Turkey go in implicating Mohammed bin Salman? Right now, Turkey seeing international support is not really forthcoming on this issue. Or will the CIA, the way it released the report saying Mohammed bin Salman knew about it without telling Donald Trump, will they perhaps repeat maybe what they did in Iran and do a coup behind Trump's back, instigate a coup via Ahmed bin Abdulaziz? There are rumors now that he's trying to get princes on board for a coup. Will that happen? These are the two variables that we are looking at.
Okay, listen. Unfortunately, I've got to wrap. Ines Jadidi and Sami Hamdi, thanks so much. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.